Welcome. Come on up. Thank you.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Have a seat and introduce yourself to the jury, please.
My name is Kimberly, Kimberly Jewett, Jewett.
Where are you employed?
I'm employed with the Georgia Bureau of Investigations, Division of Forensic Sciences, commonly referred to as the State Crime Lab.
How long have you been with the Crime Lab?
About 16 years now.
What's your job title at the Crime Lab?
I am the manager of the Trace Evidence Section.
How long have you been the manager of the Trace Evidence Section?
About 7 months now.
Prior to being the manager of the Trace Evidence Section, what did you do?
I was the assistant manager of the Trace Evidence Section for about 2 years. And before that, I was a scientist in the Trace Evidence Section, commonly referred to as a microanalyst.
What is your education and training that allows you to hold your position?
I have a Bachelor of Science degree in biology with a minor in chemistry from the University of West Georgia. I've completed 2 courses at the McCrone Research Institute in Chicago, Illinois, one on applied polarized light microscopy, the other on human and animal hair. I've completed a course at Hook College of Applied Sciences in Westmont, Illinois on hair analysis. I've completed a 12-month training program at GBI for hair analysis, a 6-week training program on physical fit analysis, and a 6-month training program on gunshot primer residue analysis.
Have you ever testified as an expert in trace evidence or gunshot residue?
Yes, I have.
How many times?
Approximately 70.
And Judge, the state tenders Ms. Jewett specifically as an expert in trace evidence, specifically relating to gunshot residue.
No objection to Ms. Jewett.
So ordered again, members of the jury, you can accept just like any other witness or not accept. Thank you.
Ms. Jewett, can you please explain to the jury what happens when a firearm is fired?
Yes, so to back up just a little, let's go through the pieces of a cartridge case. So if you kind of look at a cartridge case from the top to the bottom, there's the casing that surrounds the whole case. There's the projectile or bullet at the very top. Underneath that is gunpowder, and at the very base is the gun primer. The primer is made up of metals that are highly sensitive or explosive. And specifically what we're looking at are the parts that contain lead, barium, and antimony. So when that cartridge case is put into a firearm and the trigger is pulled on that firearm, the hammer strikes the base of that cartridge case. That makes that primer, that was very sensitive, explode. That explosion is going to have an increase in gases and pressure and a spark that's going to cause the gunpowder to burn. When that gunpowder burns, there's more gases, there's more heat, and it gets to a part where that cartridge case can no longer contain the projectile. So when the heat and the pressure becomes too much, that projectile or bullet is forced out of the firearm in the direction it's pointed. Now that that projectile has exited, all those gases can now leave that cartridge case and that gun. So it's going to come out of the gun in any available opening. That gas then touches the cooler, less pressurized air. It's going to condense very quickly to a liquid and then a solid, and falls out and attaches to everything around. So what you have in this process is gunshot primer residue, that are small particles and contain the elements lead, barium, and antimony.
So when somebody says gunshot residue, does that really mean gunshot primer residue?
There's 2 different parts of gunshot residue. There's the gunpowder that's gunshot residue, so the organic portions of that gunpowder, and then there's gunshot primer residue that's looking at the metals from the primer portion.
So specifically regarding gunshot residue, did your section at the crime lab receive samples to be tested from the Hall County Sheriff's Office at the crime lab in case number 1007-4975.
We did not receive any from the sheriff's office. I believe we received something from the medical examiner's office.
Okay, and was that in connection with the case number that I mentioned?
Yes, it was.
So what happened when y'all received, what did you receive from the medical examiner?
We received a gunshot primer residue kit as well as paper bags off of the victim in this case.
And once you received that, what did you do with it?
All of it is going to go through a process where the manager of the section reads through the case file, and then it will assign it to an analyst when that analyst becomes available to work a case. In reviewing gunshot primer residue cases, one of the things we look at is to see if the individual sampled received a gunshot wound in the incident. Our policy is if they received a gunshot wound, we do not test the kit because we can't tell you anything more than you would already know, and that's that they were involved in a shooting incident.
So specifically in regards to this case, did the manager of the section, who I guess at the time was Mr. McCarriger?
Yes, Mr. McCarriger was the manager at the time this case was entered.
Did he assign the residue to an analyst to be looked at?
He did not in this case because when he read through the case file, he noticed that the individual sampled had sustained a gunshot wound. So instead, he released a case information update.
Okay, so when we say the individual sampled, would that be the victim in the case?
In this case, it was the victim, yes.
Okay. And so it sounds like y'all have a policy.
We do, yes.
And what is the reason? What's your understanding of the reason for that policy?
The reason would be that if we test a kit and that kit shows gunshot primer residue on the individual's hands, it means one of three things happened. Either the individual discharged a firearm, or the individual was in the presence of a discharging firearm, or they came into contact with an item whose surface bears GSR. So something like a recently discharged firearm. We cannot distinguish between the three things what actually occurred. So if someone has a gunshot wound, we know they've been in the presence of a discharging firearm. So if we already know that, we don't have a reason to test it because we can't tell you anything more than you already know. You know they were in the presence of a discharging firearm. We don't need to use our scientists and our expensive technology to tell you that.
Okay. So based on your training and experience and your knowledge of the location of the victim in this case, would gunshot residue testing have been scientifically significant in this case?
No, it would not.
And I want to ask you a question about one of the projectiles in this case was fired from a Glock 9mm through that door that's right there, State's Exhibit 198. If that were the only gunshot that we had that occurred in the presence of the victim, would you expect to find any gunshot residue as the result of a projectile being fired through a wood object like that door?
Yes, we would. There's been some studies done that wanted to look at this specific type of situation to see if it could go through things like doors, windows, things like that. So a study was done that was published, I believe, in the Journal of Forensic Sciences that had someone on one side of a room, they put glass through the center, a target on the other side, and a mannequin with clothing underneath where the projectile would go. They repeated several times shooting through the glass to see if GSR would be found on the other side of the glass, on the target, on the clothing underneath. And in all of the situations that they did, they found a large amount of GSR, not only on the target, but on the clothing underneath the projectile. So we know that even going through glass, so also something like a door, you would still expect to find gunshot primer residue traveling with that projectile to the other side. So we would still expect the victim to have gunshot primer residue on him.
So adding that scenario into a scenario where you have a second firearm being discharged nearby where the victim is laying, would you expect to find even more gunshot residue?
Again, yes, because at that point, the victim is in the presence of a discharging firearm right on top of them. So when we find gunshot primer residue, again, the presence of discharging firearm. So it's not just the victim, it's not just the shooter, it would be anyone around. To give you an idea, gunshot primer residue, when it comes out of a firearm, it forms a cloud or a plume, as we call it, of GSR. Think of taking an open bag of flour and throwing it up in the air. And you're gonna have this big cloud of flour, right? That falls out, attaches to everything around, not just the person that threw it. If I did it right now, she's gonna have flour. Everyone nearby is gonna have flour. Gunshot primer residue does the same thing, except it's gonna go further and faster. So it can go up to 3 meters to the back and sides from studies that have shown, and 10 meters, which is 30 feet, to the front right quadrant. Further that way, because that's where the ejection port is. And then with the projectile, we've seen up to 60 feet. So being just in the room when it was discharged would explain why GSR was on the individual.
So if you have multiple projectiles being fired in the presence of the victim, does it then become even less scientifically significant to do the testing?
Yes, it would be even less scientifically significant.
Thank you. That's all the questions that I have.
What were the 3 conclusions that can be drawn? You listed them out, but I missed them. There's 3 conclusions that can be drawn when you find gunshot residue on somebody's hands specifically.
Yes, so that means that either the person discharged a firearm, was in the presence of a discharging firearm, or came into contact with an item whose surface bears GSR.
Okay. The number one of those 3, the number one conclusion is that that person actually fired a firearm.
That is one of the 3 possibilities, yes.
And you're aware that in this case, the deceased was found with his right hand underneath his body, laying on top of his right hand. You're aware of that?
I'm not aware of all the specificities, but again, I know that he received a gunshot wound.
Okay. If he's laying on his right hand and his body is covering him, are you saying that a person, that if there are shots made in his general vicinity, that somehow they're going to get underneath his body and get onto his hand?
So again, it forms a cloud or a plume. He would have had to have been laying there potentially to cover any kind of gunshot primer residue. But there have been studies to look at where, if handedness could be a factor, right hand, left hand. So they had someone put their hands behind their back and shoot forward. They still found GSR on the hand to the back. So even if he's laying on top of it, I wouldn't be able to say how it would have gotten there. I would still have expected gunshot primer residue to be on his hands at the time.
Well, there's a big difference between putting your hand behind your back and shooting a gun and having your hand stuck under your entire body, isn't there?
I mean, it could be, but he would have had to be laying there the entire time. And again, think of that flour. Do you think no flour is going to get on that hand that's underneath if a whole bag is thrown? I mean, I would still expect it to be there. The point is that at the end of the day, I can't tell you anything more than a person was in the presence of a discharging firearm, and we know that he was.
And ultimately, of course, the decision not to test the GSR wasn't even yours. It was Mr. McBarringer.
McCarriger would be his name. He's the one that made the call specifically in this case, but really he's just the one that produced the case information update to explain it. This is a policy that we've had since 2009. If you go on our GBI website, you can see a bunch of operations bulletin, and it says that back from 2009, we do not routinely work victims' kits. This is also something not specific to GBI. This is common in the GSR community.
And you would, in other words, make the exact same call about testing that kit?
Yes, I would have made the same call. I would not have tested this kit.
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. You're excused.